guys and girls. My name is Andrea. I'm very excited to introduce our keynote speaker today, Anna Patterson, VP of Engineering and AI in Google, co-founder of Cool, the search engine, and co-founder of Progressive Women of Silicon Valley, a cause close to my heart. Anna Patterson, thanks.
Hello, good morning. Wow, this is loud. I'm not sure, how much you guys know or whether you read the bio, but I've been an early engineer in lots of projects that were successful and some that weren't. So I'm here today to talk about some lessons learned. I won't go so far as to say that there's going to be a lot of pearls of wisdom, but at least we can try for the oysters and see if there's any pearls. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about today in lessons learned is about focus. I think we know a lot of companies that have really focused from the very beginning through IPO, and their names are household names like Google and Facebook, and also success factors, and even a recent company like FireEye that did network security. From their very founding story through IPO, they had a lot of focus. And the success stories are a little bit boring, so I'll tell you a bit about what happens, a lesson I learned by not following this advice, and that was the startup cool. So we had a pretty spectacular launch, and while we were doing a roadshow, we were provisioning our servers for the launch, and we introduced two really gnarly bugs. One of them we were able to find a few weeks later, and one of them kind of lingered on. And we had this whole roadmap of bells and whistles we were going to add. And so we actually did our roadmap. We kind of really added, extra bells and whistles instead of, focusing on, what we launched. And by doing that, it wasn't until probably a year and a half later that we decided we really needed sustained focus. And we found this bug, which was actually in secondary sort, which was making all of our results wonky. So if you've ever seen a phone book, if you sort first by the last name A, and then you sort by the B's, you don't want the sort to be unstable, and that is put something like BB before an AB. And so that was actually what was happening deep inside one of our platforms, and that was causing extreme badness. So I think this conference has lots of startups. I think I saw the stat that it was 76% people who were in small companies and 10% of people who fund small companies. So I kind of built this talk around some startup advice. So I think the first thing is to focus. The second thing is that the first implementation you ship matters. I think one of the problems I have with even saying this is that it flies in the face of something I really believe, which is ship. You have to ship to compete. You have to get out there and iterate. But if your platform is wonky, if you've built it and slapped it together and thrown in lots of Band-Aids, and I'm sure you guys have all done that for a demo, it's not necessarily good for a launch, that bad things can happen. So I wanted to talk about a few projects that I think really got off to a good start with their first implementation. And one of those is Android. So I joined Android as about the 90th engineer. And at that time, we'd sold about 40 million phones, and we went on to sell more phones. But Android, by making the decision to be open source, I think it had a level of code that, was unsurpassed for a first launch. Because, when you're writing code for yourself or for a demo, it's when you're writing it and your colleagues read it, it's better. But when you're writing it and the world is going to read it, you kind of go all out. So, that's what happened, and it led to a really good foundation on which to build. And the second good implementation that I was able to witness was I was actually at Stanford. I was a research scientist in the computer science department at Stanford, working for John McCarthy on AI. And there were lots of companies born out of the Stanford Computer Science Department. I got to see Excite founded when it was a different company name, Architects. And I got to see Google founded. And Excite, by the time Google was founded, was a big company. Some of you guys look maybe old enough to remember, and some of you probably don't. And so, when Google came along, the very first search algorithm looked radically different. So really, Excite had a lot of exciting features. It had something that looked like a knowledge card, for a query like Britney Spears. It had her birth date and her latest single. So it had a lot of cool information, but if you were looking for information on Linux drivers, it wasn't as good kind of at the deeper queries. And so, when Google came out, their first implementation really looked different. And I think, one of the tales about first implementations is not only that the first implementations are easy to build on, but so many times that first implementation and that look and that direction ties into the focus, and that really becomes what your company does. So when you think about Netscape, and when they came out with the browser, they did text, and then they did pictures. And then sure, lots more things we can now view and render in the browser, but it was all kind of based on the early magic, and that's what made it take off. The next controversial thing that I say a lot, but not necessarily in public, is that sometimes 10x isn't good enough. I do some angel investing, so people come to me and they say, wow, I have this thing that's 10x better. And if you've done a great job with your system and with your implementation, kind of stretching it to 10x is actually possible. 3x more users and 3x more data, and you got 9x right there. And it's a problem, and there's a lot of trade-offs that you make trying to ramp something up to 10x, and it's definitely brittle at that point, but it often works. Whereas what you really want to aim for is 100x. And the reason why is because a lot of times the real leaps in technology aren't these incremental things. They're actually a whole new way of thinking. And they're also kind of deep in the guts of the system. So what happens if you make maybe your web server 5% faster? You actually get that win because it's really close to the user. But so many of the systems back up a level of maybe fetching images, then you back up a level to in search indexing algorithms and serving algorithms. And every time you take a step back, you have the possibility of losing your win. So one such time this happened to me is with TerraGoogle. When I proposed it to be just that, a trillion-page index, and I got a lot of snickers. And what happens when you have a design it's a little bit mathy, is like real life gets in the way. So let's say that you have a 100x solution, and then someone says, oh, you have to replicate your data 3x. Well, right there, you're down to 33, so we'll call it 30. And other bits of real life, different networking, different protocols, those can add or delete another 3. So when you start with 100, you're really hoping to get a win that's like 15x or 20x actually deployed. And that's going to relieve the stress from the system that you just built that's now getting creaky. So another problem we had is the web was getting bigger. It was getting bigger exponentially. And indexing for a search engine needs to see every page, because that's what it is. It's like an index in the back of the book. It has to point to every mention of the Web Summit. And so it needs to see all the pages. And if the pages are growing exponentially, do you want to buy exponentially more servers? No. So you have to really take a look at different ways of doing things. So actually, we projected that some of our algorithms would completely fall over and be useless in about 2 years at the current rate of web growth. So we were worried that maybe if the web growth increased, these algorithms would be dead in a year. So that kind of, created an emergency. And, exponential growth is more than 10x. So I think we're going to see more things like mobile grew exponentially for a while as well. So that's why you have to look beyond 10x. So when you're doing a new system, to solve a problem, I think the real temptation is to patch what you have. And I totally believe in patching. When you're in trouble, time is short, to get, another 5x out of the system, I think patching is great. But in case you guys haven't noticed, since we're all in technology moves on really fast. So if you're talking about a 3-year-old system, you're talking about a system that was designed for different machines, different memory, different bandwidth to memory, different disk specs. You're really talking about an architecture whose kind of day has come and gone. So really, I'd advise to start fresh instead of patching onto the old system. Re-implementing often means kind of making the same mistakes again. At least if you start fresh, you make the previous generation mistake. No, hopefully not, but sometimes that happens. And the second thing is, I know you guys, a lot of you are at startups, and I think recruiting is another key factor in starting fresh, because just think about it for a minute. You're thinking about taking a job to build something, and you get to VI an empty file. Or imagine your job is going to be adding to a program that has 1 million lines of code. So the job of adding 5,000 lines to 1 million lines of code isn't nearly as exciting. So, and it's often the wrong thing to do. So this leads me to, sorry, I didn't know I was losing my voice, to another point, which is trying to decide what to do. You have to actually, normally called like skate to where the puck is going. So a lot of people talk about execution, that what you need to do in a startup is you need to get in and execute. But what are you executing on, right? You have to, if you're going to come in with a solution right on time, you have to be doing it now. Because you have to do it now, because good things actually take a while to build, maybe a year and a half in a lot of my projects. And So, what are you doing? What's the burning need? You have to be doing it now in order to deliver it just in time. And so that brings me to metrics. So I think hopefully everybody believes in looking at metrics in order to figure out how your business is faring and how your space is evolving. But I actually think that you need to take a while however fast your business is moving, every 3 months to look over what your metrics are. Because if you're a really old company and you run your business on the same metrics you always have, you can miss huge opportunities like mobile. So I think you should just put it on your calendar to review the metrics you run your businesses by. So the algorithm I talked about earlier, by the time it was delivered, it was actually a little bit late. But then it wound up seeming like execution, like, wow, you noticed that problem last month and you already have a solution, when actually it was about predicting that there was going to be a problem. So I guess my most controversial slide. So I kind of see, growing a company as you really need to have, tasks super well defined and where people can work independently. So in the beginning, web crawlers, if you look at their algorithms, they worked like this. I'm going to discover a page, and then I'm going to put it on a list, and I'm going to see if anybody else discovered the page, and then we're going to assign a priority to that page, and then only if it's high priority and no one else is doing it am I allowed to crawl the page. So that's kind of a lot like when a company gets really big. I have a cool thing I want to do. I have to put it on a list, see if it's high priority and no one else is doing it, and only then are you allowed to do it. So actually, most of these core companies and most of these first implementations were done by a very small team. And only after they started getting the ball rolling, where it seemed like they were going to be successful, did the headcount really start piling on. So that leads me to what happens when you have a success disaster. So sometimes the ball can get rolling really fast, and you're unprepared for it. And I think that's where a few of the tips come in, by having good implementation, thinking ahead with 10x or more, so that you can actually live through the success. But when we launched Android, Mary Meeker has this lovely report, which I found in preparation for this talk, that Android quarter over quarter grew 6 times faster than the iPhone in its 5 quarters past launch. And now I know why we were feeling so overwhelmed. And so, when you haven't provisioned enough, it's like everything's on fire and everything's an emergency until you can kind of get ahead of the curve and calm things down. But a lot of startups really think that downtime is a disaster, and that downtime is a success disaster, like you have so many users that you're down. But there can be good reasons to take downtime. So one time we were in a situation where we were going to have to build a pretty complicated system in order to avoid 5 to 15 minutes of downtime. And so when you're talking about engineering resources and risk, there are definitely systems that need to be up, right? 911 calling, or I guess it's 999 here. But so many times at your startup, you're really into it, your users are into it, but it's okay if it's going to really push forward your velocity to take some downtime rather than 9 months of engineering for no downtime. You should think about that in the future, but keep your velocity. So a lot of people have asked me for advice in raising money. I guess Harvard Business put together a report of top raising women of all time. And I was very surprised and maybe sad to find that I was in the top 5. I've raised $33 million of money and another 10 of debt. I wouldn't recommend the debt, by the way. It's another talk. And I think, there isn't a great formula for approaching VCs. I've seen very successful pitches where people came in with nothing. No PowerPoint, no demo, no team. They came in and chatted. That can be very effective, 2 people talking about the future. I've seen the traditional team, they're all wound up, and they have their PowerPoint, which also has a fly-through of their product. Nothing's actually coded up. And, all the way to companies that were very tiny, but very tiny bit profitable. And I guess there's famous stories like eBay was profitable, but saw VCs to kind of change the trajectory of their growth curve. So in terms of concrete advice about how to get your pitch deck together, I don't have any, but I can tell you the most common mistake, since this is the builder side of the summit, that I see engineers make when they go into VCs. And that is, you're there with your deck and your team, and you're really, really tense. And then the VC's 10 minutes late into the conference room or more. So now you're really wound up thinking, how am I going to get through all my slides? And how am I now going to do it in 40 minutes or 45 minutes? I'm going to convince them to fund the company. So I have two pieces of advice. One, it's never one meeting that convinces them. But the biggest mistake I see people make is that the VC will say something like, hey, the skiing was awesome this weekend. Did you go skiing? And often the engineers will freeze like, what are we doing? We're wasting valuable time when I could be telling you my idea. And, if you do that, if you just refuse the chit-chat and go into the idea, your probability of being funded has been drastically reduced. Because you have to think about it like you're both interviewing a co-founder. You would want to get to know your co-founder. You want to know whether you can work with them, whether you can chit-chat with them. So if the whole 40 minutes is taken up with chit-chat, it's okay. They'll see you again. And lastly, a note to the entrepreneurs. So I think usually this slide would be titled, Believe in Yourself. And you should really believe in yourself. The entrepreneurial team has most of the data. But when you realize it, they might have 50% of the data. And maybe other people's experience from their investors, maybe that adds. Maybe they have 10% of the data, and I'm hoping it's additive, not just disjoint. But so, really the entrepreneur's in the best situation to judge the situation, but you still kind of have to go with your gut. So kind of have to have a good time, a good outlook, stay positive, and realize that what you're doing is you're really winging it. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Hannah. Great talk. So we have time for questions. We have one here.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Sultan. I'm coming from a telco background. My background is in networking. So you mentioned about indexing billions and billions of pages every day.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned one point very important about we don't need to expand servers every day. We don't need to have many, many networks all over the path. So what Google is doing for the current evolution in networking, that's one point. And the second question is, you mentioned as well about high availability, and 5 seconds of downtime is really very big. And how do you want to achieve this as long as you are growing and you are moving and the web is growing and the WAN is growing as well? Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.
So I think the advice about downtime is more about startups and more that it's okay to have downtime when you're a startup if it's going to help you be nimble. Obviously, Google doesn't like to have downtime. And then to your first question about indexing, yeah, I mean, machines have really grown in capacity. I'm pretty sure the machines now, they have, a lot more cores, and they're a lot, meatier than they were, 10 years ago. So the machines themselves have grown, but not as exponentially as the web. And you're right, like networking characteristics are really different. And so I've noticed in the news, I guess a few years ago, it was public that Google makes its own switches because our networking needs really didn't align with most companies. And so when you're a niche player and you have different needs, then that led us to build our own networking.
PJ, yep.
Got it. Hello.
Hi.
I'm Kostas Vlachakis from Athens, Greece. I'm running a news technology website called techblog.gr. I would like to ask if it's better to have a tiny company with good profit or a bigger company with less profit. Thank you.
So whether it's better to have a tiny company, I mean, I think it's kind of a personal choice, and it's also a choice that you have to make with your founding team, right? A tiny company with enough profit where you and your co-founders and employees are all happy is a happy thing, right? I mean, having a huge company really makes you guys all kind of be on all the time. You have to be really on your mail, and you have to kind of have less of that balance and work-life balance. So it's really a personal decision.
Hi, Anna, Sarah Carey. You may remember me from the Startup Cool, where we worked together. 2 questions for you. One is, I know a company that is thinking of moving from updating their versions maybe 3 times a year and releasing them to having a single code line. Would you have any advice for them on how they do that? It looks pretty scary. And the other one is, what other lessons would you draw from Cool and your move back into Google afterwards?
So I think rather than having a big monolithic system that, you do all your down integrating and you make sure you've done all your QA and it's all perfect before it is released, I do think that's kind of a older model. New things are made up of just many, many more parts. So you can ship out a new data file and that might change the look. I noticed some websites doing like, a pink banner for Breast Cancer Awareness Month and stuff like that. So really tons of small things that are easily changed and therefore they're easily updated. That's definitely more the model and a trend that I see. Wow, what lessons I learned from Cool? Well, I told you guys some of them. And I guess counterintuitively, when we saw those bugs at the end, I think it wasn't just about focus, but, I think people are always reamed if they're too hands-on, if they're too detail-oriented, if they don't trust their team enough. But I actually think, hey, the founders, it's kind of all on the line for you. So if there's a problem, I think you should be detail-oriented, be in people's business, and don't let the curiosity end at someone else's job. Really see it through.
Do you have any other questions?
Got one back here.
Oh, PJ's going to have to run for it.
You put me on the stairs, man. You know I'm American. This is not fair.
Hi, this is Adrian from TechDev Solutions. I really liked your comment about staffing and that less is more. Do you have an advice how you can convince people who actually do have funding, and they actually think that they should hire more people and heaps of people just to, well, be covered for the future or whatever, and then they have all those people sitting there and not knowing what to do with them?
Yeah. Hiring people, I always have a adage, which maybe my new employees might not like to hear, but you really know a lot about an employee in their first week of work. They're really trying to impress, and they check out the code on the first day, and they tell you what's wrong with it, and they bring ideas, and hopefully they've checked in something by Friday. So what happens is when you bring people in without a plan because you're just trying to bulk up, I think the only time that that's a good plan is some people bulk up right after they've gotten an acquisition term sheet, but before it's closed. And they're kind of just adding people like, yay, get on the gravy train. But when you're actually trying to build something, bringing somebody on, not knowing what they're going to do, I think it's a bad idea. But sometimes people are really creative, like they are an expert in their own area. So bringing them in to say, you're senior, have a look around, I know you're going to fix stuff. That's a good time to bring somebody in without knowing what their actual job is.
I actually have a question related to that, Anna, over here.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions on good onboarding strategies for engineering teams?
Let's see. So I like teams to be really, cohesive. But when people are coming on their first week, I try to give them all the support they can in order to feel like they can contribute. We usually do some sort of, and we even did it at Cool, some sort of starter project. And it was really to get them to know, so it's like a 2 or 3 week thing, and it's okay if they fail. You're kind of trying to get to know what they're good at. And so they come on board, they have to check out the code, they have to do something simple, and then you're able to understand what they're good at, what their strengths and weaknesses are, in order to slot them into just the right thing.
Okay.
I had a quick question, actually. You mentioned in the beginning about Android development and it being open source, and you also mentioned the importance of shipping it as quickly as possible. Did you find it was difficult to ship fast when you kind of had that community of developers to also answer to, more or less?
Well, for an operating system, we shipped initially 3 times a year and then 2 times a year. So that is a super grueling pace for an operating system. So that wasn't the thing that was slowing us down. I think needing sleep really slowed us down.
Human problems. Do you have any more questions? Put your hand up, please, over here.
Robbie Adams from Mobiliser. With monetisation for apps at the moment, do you think the horse is bolted to make consumers pay for apps, or is there still the opportunity there to get a return?
I couldn't quite hear the total question. Can you maybe repeat it?
Yeah, if you ask again, this monitor in front of you, actually,
Okay.
just stand a bit closer to it.
Yeah.
No worries, thanks. I guess we've developed an app at the moment, and like everyone in here, the questions were there about how much to charge consumers for it.
Yeah.
Do you think the horse is bolted because there's so many free apps out there in the market? Or I guess what would you suggest for monetisation for new apps coming on?
Yeah, I think trying to figure out a price point is something a lot of new apps do. So they actually play around with different strategies. You'll see a lot of apps do a free and a paid version, and then people like it but realize it's not fully featured, or they don't want to see the ads. It depends on what kind of app it is. Like in a game, people will say, I really want to get rid of the ads, and then they'll upgrade to the paid version. I actually think that, if you did, it'd be hard to go back in time, but if you did 1,000 queries now on Google Play and 1,000 queries 4 years ago, I think you're seeing more paid apps now.
Hi, my name is Andy. I'm with TaskRabbit. Great talk. One question that I had about one of the slides that you mentioned, which was starting fresh versus re-implementing. I was wondering how you think about when it's appropriate to invest the time to start fresh as opposed to patching. And I know it can be expensive or to invest in a fresh start, so I'm curious about your
I
thoughts
think
there.
right after you've patched and you realize that this patch is going to be creaky, like you're going to, right after you've patched, you know when you've done something wrong. I mean, we've all done it. Do not change any code here, that kind of stuff. It's kind of a sign. So, right after you've done some things that you would not like open sourced if your friends read it, I think it's often time to invest in starting again.
I have a question just on that, Anna.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get kind of, let's call them cultural resistance to introducing that kind of refresh, where engineers are like, but I've spent 18 months building this, and have you encountered that? And is there, let's say on a human level or a team level, is there a way around that to like massage things and just say, we're doing this, sorry?
I have seen it. I kind of think about it in my mind as like, being married to your code. You're kind of sad when you're not with it. And I've seen engineers like this, right? You just, you have to say, like, the code was great. It was really great code. But, like that living room that you haven't cleaned and you just kind of let it go, the furniture's getting old, it's really time to move on.
Is it like a conversation you have when maybe a dog is getting older in age and has to go out in the country now, sorry, and he's going to chase rabbits for the rest of his life?
When you're changing direction or you're introducing something new, I think, we often like go to dinner and then it's, an open-ended, maybe a pub afterwards, so people can kind of get it out.
To vent and to...
Yeah.
And then a clean start next day.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. Any more questions? PJ? Yep. You have a question here?
Sorry about steps. Alan Diskin, Fidelity Investments. Kind of related to that question on trying to break it to someone that you want to rewrite their code, and related to metrics. You mentioned that you want to periodically revisit them. How much of a focus would you put on, or would you advise startups to put on technical debt just from the get-go? Because normally we just start to look at it when there's a mountain there.
That's kind of my point with the first implementations matter. I mean, you really, really have to get out there, but starting a company with a lot of technical debt, I think, is a very, very bad idea.
Hey, Anna, you're one of the software icons in the industry, and you've also been very active on women in engineering. And for those of you women out there who are breaking into engineering, what kind of advice/guidance do you have for trolling ahead?
I'm involved with like school-aged girls. And I think one of the things that they have an opinion about is that programming is really hard. And then some of the women didn't do well in calculus. And so they're thinking, I didn't do well in calculus, I'm never going to be good in programming. And I say, how were you at statistics? and they say, oh, I was awesome at statistics. So I think we need to do some marketing that actually just being good at statistics or just being good at thinking, it makes programming pretty easy. I haven't seen little kids, so in some of the school districts in Silicon Valley, they teach programming starting at first grade. And, there's really no difference. It's not like the girls think it's hard and the boys think it's easy. They both think it's interesting. So I think it's kind of a cultural thing that has happened.
Yeah, I've noticed that people with philosophy degrees, when they realize there's not much opportunity in philosophy, I don't have hard data, but there's an unusual number of people I've encountered who have done a philosophy course and then they get into programming.
Yeah, and physics as well.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Any other questions? Right over here.
Hi, I'm Ron from Advertising Media. I have a question about behavior-driven and test-driven development. Do you have any suggestions and tips for us how to bring it in the development process?
I think one of the things that was kind of touched on earlier about not wanting to start fresh is I actually think, when you're building a development culture, you really have to bake those ideas of, hey, we're always going to be getting better. We're going to, start fresh from time to time. You kind of need to build that into the culture. And then actually people get excited. They think, okay, well, I can have an idea, and I can do it, and I can run with it. And it becomes very empowering.
We have another question here.
Rodrigo from Hot 5. How do you get engineers to work better together? I find that, especially with juniors, they tend to be very protective of their code, and they kind of go into silos a lot.
Yeah, I have heard of companies that, the code for one project isn't actually visible by another project, and if someone touches your code, it's, I don't know, pistols at dawn or something. But I think that's part of building the culture in your startup, so that I think some of the best collaborations are, we had, at Cool, we had some folks in Belgium, and so when we were going to bed, they were starting, so kind of pass the code off to them. And that happens a lot in big companies too. So you kind of have a set of people and it can keep going because it's a global company. So I think it's part of the culture. You need to make sure people don't get too protective.
Hi, I'm Hisham from Fujitsu. You went back to Google to build a particular architecture that you really wanted to build. Can you just let us know what impact that architecture is and was on Google search architecture in general? And the other question is, I know now you're working on the AI side, so if there's something you can let us know about the latest technology you're working on in AI. Thanks.
So the search architecture, I think you're referring to, I did a history-based search engine out of the Internet Archive. And the Internet Archive had snapshots of the web over time. And so it would let you do a query like Clinton and dial the year 1996. And it would be all presidential, and later on it was all about Monica Lewinsky. And even later, the query Clinton came about Hillary Clinton. And so when I came, and Internet Archive is a nonprofit, so they did not have a lot of machines. And I had not taken any courses in how to build a search engine, which means I did it wrong. And then when I came to Google, I said, hey, what about that cheap architecture I did over at the Internet Archive? And so, Terra Google was founded on some of the concepts. And when it launched, our search engine, I think overnight had maybe 10 times more pages. and it served as a basis for being able to become more international.
Another question over here.
Yeah, I'm Guts from the site, and I'd like to know whether you can tell us anything about how ideas are spreading between some of the acquisitions like Nest, like Boston Dynamics, and Google, and how you build kind of ecosystem for artificial intelligence projects.
Yeah, so artificial intelligence is really done, mostly at universities. And so there's like 300 universities. We fund, research projects in all areas with over 100 universities. And so it's really something that's done in the open. And I think, AI is the art of making something smarter. So things that were seen as like full AI projects in the 1960s were driving directions, right? That was like a dream. And now, I used it just yesterday, and even walking directions. So I think, that's kind of a fully realized AI project, and it's super helpful.
Okay, we've another question here, and I think we'll take probably 2 more questions after this.
Hello, my name is Diego Francisco. I would like if you can give us your opinion on pair programming and how do you tackle silos, please?
Yeah. Wow, so pair programming. So a lot of people love it. I think it's one of those things that's really a personal taste. Some amazing programmers that I know program in pairs. And, you have 2 eyes on the code, but there's also the more traditional, I guess, code review, if it's actually done well, where you write it and then you explain it to someone and they, check for errors. That's a little bit more time efficient. Really sitting with someone all day intensely creating I don't think it's for everybody.
Okay, we're actually going to leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you very much for speaking.
Thanks.
Could you please give her a big round of applause?